That first person you hire, forget their title, whatever you call them, when you go from founder-led sales to somebody else, can they demonstrate to you that they have immense ability to tolerate pain? I'm talking about getting pounded, of like pain of doing shit on your own. Like, they just have to be able to crawl through the mud as they're taking the baton from the founder and now bringing the business to the next level of growth. I think that just takes a very special type of person.
Alex Kottoor, nice to have you on the show. Psyched to talk to you today. Have good, candid and casual conversation that should absolutely be hysterical, because every time I talk to you, I get off the phone in stitches just laughing. I love this guy. So nice to have you.
Thanks for having me, brother. I was just thinking that this is going to be a fun convo because, well, you've been around the arena of sales for forever. So it'll be, I'm looking forward to it, man. Thanks for having me.
No problem. No problem. So you got a journey, an awesome journey and a story to tell. And I'd love for you to, tell me the story.
This is always fun, when you get on pods and it's like that fully loaded question of like, where do you start? Where do you end? Okay. Well, we're talking to as sales guys here, right? So started my professional career, as an inside sales guy, at a wonderful company called CDW out of Chicago.
Yep. I know him.
You know him?
Yeah.
And I think at the time, I remember actually, this is 2004, right? So 20 some odd years ago, probably taking to Yahoo or AOL at the time about what CDW was. And I remember reading some sales magazine that escapes me now that said they were like the top 13 companies in the US to sell for. And honestly, it's what sold me. Took to monster.com. Yeah, I remember that. Looked up IT sales gigs, came across a few companies, pursued CDW. I was so fortunate and blessed to have found a spot there. It's really, I've said this a few times publicly, but it's where I really learned about what hard work looked like, what good looked like if I was going to dedicate my life to the profession of sales. And it's where I really got obsessed about solving for customer problems. And I think that's a thread that, despite being an entrepreneur now and being in the startup world now, it's something that I try to live by each and every day, which is like, just how are we staying focused on authentically pursuing the path of helping our customers solve problems through technology, and deeply understanding those problems and the impact of those problems better than others. And, that's the kind of the blade that I try to continue to sharpen. So anyway, that was kind of like the first 9 or so years of my journey. From there, I was again blessed. I've been blessed in every chapter of my life, so that may be a continued theme here. But I was blessed to meet a great co-founder who had an amazing idea to build a software company. And this is now in 2010. And Adrian, said, hey, we should get into the world of mobile applications. And at that time, we were just starting to see an explosion of people carrying and living off of a BlackBerry. And, the enterprise was trying to figure out what they were going to do with the advent of the iPad and the iPhone in the enterprise environment. And that's the environment I came from. And so he had an idea of building a note-taking application. And we were two kind of lunatics who said, hey, we could sell a few million apps at 99 cents and get everybody using, what we called Picky Note as a consumer-based application. And, the basic foundation of that app, Dan, was you snap a picture, create content on or around an image, and then share it with somebody. And we had some enterprise workflows that were really suited for that type of those building blocks. And, just think of like the way that IT help desks work, right? They're reacting to issues. Largely technicians in the enterprise world would, as they encounter issues, would have to go back to their laptop bag, grab a digital camera, snap pictures of the server that, arrived damaged in the data center. And they would need to like mesh that to an email, some content in an email, and send that to IT help desk for resolution. And so, Adrian's idea was like, why wouldn't we build a note-taking application that could do things like that? Serendipitously, through that process, we met a deputy director of a federal law enforcement agency, and he happened to be a user of Picky Note. And he said, hey, listen, our federal agents just got 200 of these BlackBerry playbooks. Remember those? The BlackBerry tablets?
I
Who
do.
the heck ever used those since, right? And he said, I think what you guys have is the foundation to what we could use on a crime scene to process a crime scene. And for me, honestly, it was like the lights went off, because for me as an enterprise software guy, I'm like looking for the repeatable thing to sell. And so I thought, hey, like the law enforcement and the public safety market and the military market's got to be massive. And, there's got to be tens of millions of those types of users that would use a tablet on the scene of a crime everywhere in the world. And let's go after that repeatedly. And so anyways, that was kind of the formation of my first SaaS company called SceneDoc. And we spent about 9 years building that company up. We were, again, blessed to have had an okay exit. And that kind of became the sort of the foray to everything we're doing now, which is, helping other founders not make the mistakes I made as a first-time CEO and a first-time founder, and really tripling down on my passion of go-to-market. And so I'm kind of like intersecting entrepreneurship and that focus on being customer obsessed, and, trying to pay that forward and help accelerate, other tech startups. So anyway, I'll stop there.
No, it's great. You lobbed me a softball. Seriously, Alex. Mistakes. What'd you fuck up?
What did I fuck up? What didn't I
tell
fuck
me.
up?
Well, however you want to answer the question. I want to dig into the weeds on why are mistakes happening? What are they? And how do you solve them so that founders can watch this content and learn from it and take something away from it? So
okay. Let's start at the top. I was the quote unquote professional sales guy turned founder, and my first cohort of investors thought, man, what a brilliant guy to go out and invest in, because he will know how to build revenue. Because I did sort of for the 9 years prior to that pretty darn well. But I think there's a difference between being a sales guy and then, growing revenue as a founder. I think, there's just so much in between those two chapters that I just wasn't aware of now. In hindsight, in retrospect, almost 100% of the founders I've been so privileged to help over these last couple of years generally all have the same problem, right? Who's our customer? How do we message to them? How do we sell to them? Where do we find them? How do you onboard them successfully? And then how do you get them to, come on an ARR expansion journey with you? How do you get them to renew on time? So like across that entire customer journey, that whole continuum, there's just a lot of common pitfalls, and, I made just about all of them. So, I think that, probably the most, the one that might not come to a surprise to you, Dan, is, because I know you're in the trenches with founders too today, is that founders dream big. And so we build big products, and it's a slippery slope of building features and capabilities. And we think that everybody in the market we serve should be our customer. And so I would kind of, I guess, maybe headline that sort of big first problem as going after too much of a market and not having a narrow enough ICP, not having a narrow enough ideal customer that you have actually vetted has this problem, will acknowledge that they have a problem. And third, probably most importantly in any sales process, is it a problem that they're willing to prioritize paying to solve for? And maybe we'll stop there and chop it up on that one first. But
yeah, so I've got like 100 questions. So the first one is, I refer to that as boiling the ocean.
Yeah.
And every founder finds themselves boiling the ocean. And then what happens, because you feel that anybody that wants to buy my product should. We play, and we've all heard this one, kiddie soccer. And kiddie soccer is where wherever the ball goes, 10 kids barrel after it to try to kick it, hopefully towards the goal line. And it's a recipe for disaster because you're never going to get anywhere and you lack focus. And focus is the key here. So what bit of advice would you have to a first-time founder related to boiling the ocean in kiddie soccer?
So, like, how do you do it? How do you avoid it?
How do you avoid it? How do you just get that urge not to pick up the shiny
So this
penny?
might sound redundant because you and I have had this discussion, and you see it in my writing, is I talk a lot about trenches, and I talk about the figurative shovel that we all, as sales leaders, quite frankly, and especially if you're in an early stage capacity as a sales leader or a founder, you need to grab that effing shovel and you need to go into that trench and stay there as long as you can, surrounded by prospects and customers. And it's an iterative, painful process for most. And I think that's why a lot of startup founders and early stage sales leaders fail, quite frankly, is because they don't go through that grueling work of really being introspective through the voice of the customer and staying in the trench, learning feverishly from those prospective customers in different segments, in different sizes, in different geos, in different persona sets, and really kind of, again, going back to like that foundational sort of go-to-market question I like to ask, which is, what is the problem you're solving? What's the impact of that problem you're solving? And then who on a repeatable, scalable level in a customer set acknowledges that that's a problem that they're willing to pay money to solve for. And I think that if you use that basic construct and stay in the trench long enough with the shovel, you're going to come across the use case and the profile of the exact customer that you should go and spend the next year marrying yourself to. Right? And that's where like velocity is created. That's where momentum is developed. And you know this, right? That's what defines whether or not a startup stays alive or not. At what point can they get to velocity? Right? And that's how, if you do that part of the exercise properly, you know who your customer is. You can be militant about that narrow focus, and then you'll be able to successfully and, most importantly, efficiently find them and turn them into happy, ravingly happy customers.
I'm going to translate what I heard because I want to make sure that I got your message, because I think it's identical to how I approach it, which is you go out there and you talk to as many people as possible, and you try to sell your product to as many people as possible, or at least determine whether or not they're willing to pay real money to solve a problem that is important to them. And that always requires leading with the problem and why it matters. Over time, in the trenches, as you put it, you will identify that there's a pocket or a market, a specific market, that just absolutely loves what you have, loves your story, and will buy that product. That becomes your initial ICP, ideal customer profile. Go crush it with that profile and serve them really well, creating what we refer to as raving fans. And then once you've mastered that, take a look at what are some other similar ideal customer profiles that I could go to, and then go out to them and say, hey, I did this really well for these guys. We can take that same approach to you and solve these problems which you have, which are similar. Now you got another ICP. And then wash, rinse, repeat. And before you know it, you have boiled the ocean, but not all at once. You boiled it a little bit at a time to ultimately come up with, I got 10 pots of boiling ocean water on the stove right now. Each one is its own, perhaps separate sales team with separate expertise. Maybe the product needs to tweak and your marketing message needs to tweak for each. But ultimately, that's how you build a business.
Yep. I think you said it perfectly. The one add I would say is maybe doing that provides you this new revenue opportunity with a new ICP. But if you stay in that quintessential trench, and maybe the next trench is not just with prospects, but with paying customers, guess what happens if you spend enough time in that trench? You start to learn about new problems that are just adjacent to the product you've already developed to the same ICP. And now you're able to take them on an expansion journey, right? I mean, we all know this, right? It's easier sometimes to solve new problems for the same customer than to go and find a new customer, right? I.e., it's easier to expand ARR with a current customer than to find an accretive dollar of new ARR from a new customer. Following me?
Oh yeah,
So,
and it's also less expensive.
yeah, it's more efficient, right? So this is, I think, another thing that, like, again, as a SaaS company, if you're a SaaS in the business of SaaS, then I think that's ultimately what can drive and spawn new product innovation. Is if you stay close enough in the trench with your paying customers, they're going to tell you about adjacent things of their current use of your product, and they're going to give you new ideas of new modules, new products, new parts of the platform, however you want to call it, that you can now start to bring them on what I call like an ARR journey. Like, how do you start to now journey with those same customers? And I think I love that thing too. I love what you said as well. Don't get me wrong. I think that's just another strategy. But to be able to grow with the customer you already have and sell and solve new problems, it's not just selling new products to them. It's like, can you help them solve additional problems? That's a cool thing too. And I think that's how great businesses scale.
So what we're talking about here is vertical growth, which is new ICPs solving the same problem, and horizontal growth, as you put it, which is same vertical, let's solve additional problems that our software is capable of solving. And both are how companies grow wildly over the long haul. I want to switch gears a little bit. You had mentioned before that you come from a sales background and you started a company, you had a partner. Was your partner also a seller, or was your partner more of a technologist?
He was definitely, so he was an idea guy. He was certainly a technologist, was not a writer of software. So he wasn't a coder in that sense. So I'd say I had the good fortune of having somebody who could see over the forest from a technology perspective and act as our CTO initially. But he was also savvy enough where he could be in front of customers. So he was a force multiplier to, I suppose, my skill set too.
Yep. So I want to dig into the pedigree that founders start their businesses with, which is either on the commercial side or on the tech side. Now, the startups that I've led and the advisory that I do, the majority are tech folks, really good engineers who identify a problem and say, hey, I can solve this. And they go and they build some amazing solution to solve the problem. And then they go to market. But their challenge is they don't know how to go to market. They know how to write great software, but they struggle going to market. Some are good. I'm generalizing here, but most of them, they struggle. So they go and they bring in a sales lead to help them go out to the market. You've seen this probably 1,000 times like I have, yes? Tell me what your perspective is on the mistakes that those types of founders make, because they come at it from a completely different place. I use the word pedigree. As opposed to a commercial person like you. So you made mistakes coming from, through the ranks from your origin. What's that tech founder doing differently? And where are they making mistakes?
So I think it's the mistake, by the way, I made even as the sales guy turned CEO, which is you let go too early, right? Like, that's the problem, right? And so I don't buy that as a founder, you can get to your first few $100,000 of ARR. Now, again, maybe I shouldn't call out the clip of revenue because I think that's irrelevant in some ways. But because I think the foundational part is the founder needs to understand the customer first and foremost. So they can't escape that. They shouldn't escape that. I don't think they should hire to try to circumvent that part of the startup journey. You will become greatly rewarded if you're the technical founder, but are still able to rally around those fundamentals that I talked about, which is getting into the trench with the shovel, understanding your customer, who should be the customer, what's the problem, what's the impact, do they actually want to solve for it and pay to solve for it. Like, that part of the journey, I think, has to be done. And I don't think you should outsource it. You have to do it. Now, do you have to do that alone in a vacuum? No. I mean, that's why great human beings like you exist. And there's plenty of people out there that can hold your hand through how to think about these things. And I think that's the help they need, right? Most founders, I mean, it's their baby. It's their whole life in this technology asset they've just developed. So I don't buy for a minute that they don't have the ability to go out and do that work. I think they just need to have somebody like us show them how to think about it. And what are those different milestones of what are those tranches of information that they need to go out and seek? I think that part is teachable, by the way. It's coachable. I mean, I've done it. I've seen people, I've seen us give these sort of building blocks to technical founders and have them go. They can do it. Now, they might not get to the first million, 2 million of ARR. I mean, there's enough headlines that we can read on LinkedIn that say you need to get to $1 million of ARR before you hand off, you move and transition from founder-led sales to your first head of sales. But I don't think it's that binary. Like, I think you just have to understand your customers first. And for the primary reason that you need to be able to put that person you hire to run sales or be your first salesperson, you need to be able to show them how to do it. You know, my business partner, Adrian, he used to always refer to it as the repeatable sale, right? The X. Like, how are you going to teach the next person the X? That repeatable sale. And so if you can't do that easily, you're not yet ready to bring somebody in from the outside.
So we're talking about founder-led sales here. It's a huge topic. Some founders go and say, we need a CRO. And they don't even know what a CRO does. And that's before they even sold, $2 or $3 million worth of whatever they're selling. Others say, nope, I want to hold on. I'm going to take control and I'm going to do this myself. And sometimes they do it too long. How do you know when the right time as a founder is to let go and make that first sales hire? And what should that first sales hire actually be?
So let's tackle the first part. When to know? I think it's about until you as a founder can document how you're going to swiftly onboard that first salesperson. And I think, again, this is where I think good advisory is a non-negotiable. I find it interesting, actually, that some founders just think they don't need advisors or don't need help. I think it's just such a cardinal mistake. I mean, I think about every good decision I've ever made in startup came as a result of having good mentors and good coaches around. It was such a big piece of it.
It's funny. If you break your leg or a doctor says you need to have a major surgical procedure, you go get another opinion,
yeah, right?
Here we are dealing with a company, and perhaps let's say you are, all right, so you're on the tech side of the founder journey, right? And you want to go make a huge go-to-market decision, but you don't have any go-to-market experience. You're right. Wouldn't you go out and find somebody who really knows their stuff and say, hey, what do you think? I'd probably ask 2 or 3 different people and figure it out. In fact, I do that anytime I need an answer on something that I'm not an expert in. I ask a lot of people, and then I form my own opinion and I do it.
Love it.
And then I fuck it up.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I completely agree. And let's go back to what you're saying, though, about, so, I mean, does that resonate with you when I say, hey, like, you should be able to take pen to paper and tell me how, like, tell me all the things about your ICP and your motion, and then tell me how you're going to teach the first person how they go from A to Z.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that every decision that you make should include as much data as possible, and then some logic and some gut and some heart. But the data is really important. You can't go into an investor or a potential acquirer and say, it felt good, so I did it. You got to go in there and say, here's the data. I tried it 100 times. 72 times out of that 100, this is what happened. I'm going to assume that that's a trend. So we're going that route. I mean, they need to see real data.
It's like a baseball player coming up to the plate, right?
Moneyball, man. That was a great movie.
It's right. I mean, it's so important. And I think it dovetails nicely actually into your second part. And you just mentioned a couple of adjectives or descriptors of things I would look for that first person, because that was the second part of your question. I had that right, where you were asking, yeah. So because I know there's great debate about like the type of person who you should hire, right? Is it a VP of sales? Is it an individual contributor? Is it the person that came from IBM, or is it the person that lived in startup land? And I don't think there's like a silver bullet to this by any stretch, but I will tell you that I've seen enough where I think you can mitigate a lot of risk by thinking about it this way. I think about it in the constructs of pain tolerance, right? It's a big part of what I think about. Is like that first person you hire, forget fuck their title, whatever you call them, when you go from founder-led sales to somebody else, can they demonstrate to you that they have immense ability to tolerate pain? And I want to see how they tolerated pain throughout their life.
So describe some of the pain in the context of the new hire at a startup.
Yeah. And it's not the shit you and I think about as sales guys, right? Like, can they deal with rejection? I mean, that's table stakes. Let's just assume like they've been in sales. They know how to deal with rejection. I'm talking about getting pounded, of like pain of doing shit on your own. There's no orchestration. There's no support. There's no sales tech stack helping you. There's no team of people helping you write RFPs and building proposals. The pain of knowing that pricing is kind of in flux and it's not all known yet. Because even like if the founder is able to successfully do what I said and they're in a position where they can move away from founder-led sales, I still think there's a gamut of unknowns that create pain for that first salesperson, right? There's just like, they just have to be able to crawl through the mud as they're taking the baton from the founder and now bringing the business to the next level of growth. I think that just takes a very special type of person. It requires a certain attitude and EQ, and that, again, I try to like not have the bias of like where they came from, because yeah, there are some people from IBM who could probably be successful as your first salesperson. Not typical from my experience, but I don't think there's like some binary statement that makes it black and white. So you have to start to look at like their track record of those softer skills, right? Like, are they unafraid to do things on their own? Like that to me is another big thing, right? Like in all the roles prior, did they have a lot of help, or were they self-starters? And I mean true self-starters. Because in the startup world, there's a difference between being a self-starting salesperson in a well-oiled machine, and there's a big difference between the self-starter that has to come into, an early stage organization and start to grow revenue.
Yep. It would be a great conversation, talking about the questions you ask during an interview process that uncover whether somebody has these qualities that you're talking about, that you seek. And I used to do this game where I would ask sales reps a hypothetical, kind of you complete the end of the story. And I would say to them, all right, so I'm going to blindfold you. I'm going to hand you $200 and I'm going to put you on a private jet, and you can fly anywhere to the continental United States. And when you get out, assume that you have no responsibility like family at home or, whatever else. Take it from there. And they'd first be like, I don't know how to answer that question. And it's just, well, you can answer it however you want to. I had one candidate years ago say to me, I'd fly to LA. And I said, why? She said, because it's cool there. I said, all right, I agree. LA's cool. What's cool about it? Oh, they have great shopping. I'm like, awesome. So what would you do? I'd immediately go shopping for shoes. I love shoes. And I'm thinking, that's not very responsible. She's going to blow all the money that I gave her on shoes. Where's she going to sleep tonight? I guess maybe she wasn't thinking about that. So then I followed up with, hey, so where are you going to sleep? What are you going to eat? And she struggled with those answers, with those questions. And I didn't hire her. But I'll tell you what, the person I did hire, I'm not going to say her name, but she's phenomenal and her career has just absolutely blossomed. And if she listens to this podcast, she's going to know it's her. She told me the most incredible she gave me a solution that involved, looking in the newspaper for a job, tending bar to make some money, going to a thrift shop and buying one outfit, getting it dry cleaned so that she could go and interview properly. And then she told me exactly the types of places or companies she'd go interview for like a full-time job. She told me she'd stay in like a hostel type of a, lodging place for cheap money. And she just had it nailed. And then I said to her, would you stay there permanently? And she said, no, I think I'd go back to my family. And I thought, ooh, she needs support. And then I said, well, why would you go back to your family if you're having such a good time? And she said, because I love my family. They're my rock. And I thought, I just absolutely love this woman. And so I hired her.
But you're touching on something that I think actually may be adjacent to the question we're on right now, or the topic, but it's a thing you probably also hear from me, is like just that value alignment. I don't think I'm as creative as an interviewer as you are, quite frankly. I think my question style happens to be more direct. So I'm like, tell me the thing that you worked on that was like the most painful part of your professional career, and like see what they say and talk about.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter how creative the question is. It's an open-ended, high gain, as I learned in sales school question. That they get to choose how they want to answer it. And also it's how well are they able to communicate the answer to the question? Or is there a lot of difficulty doing that?
And do they think before they speak, et cetera? I mean, you get to pick up a whole bunch of stuff, obviously, in these types of interactions. I mean, the other thing I was just going to add, though, to your because you said something that like led you to hire her. And to me, it translates, or it screams out to me like values, right? Like, I want to know what you value. And I thought about this, by the way, not just with sales hires, but as a CEO, you start to think about not just my direct reports, but as a company grows, everybody in a company, I believe, has to be aligned to the values of the business. And this is something I speak about ad nauseum. And by the way, this goes to like how you select your co-founder, to maybe it's like how you hire people in your organization. We do this with our partners and girlfriends and boyfriends and husbands and et cetera. Do you share the values? Because if you share the values, I'm a big believer that that's what helps you stay aligned while you're crawling through the mud, while you're dealing with intense levels of pain. You're able to endure those things because of the values you share. I don't think it's any different, by the way, than like the Navy SEALs. Right? They're able to endure that pain because they have a shared mission. They have shared value systems. And I know that in that process of how they do recruiting, it's a big part of that process. So forget about the skill set. Those things you and I know, Dan, skill sets, especially in the profession of sales, those things, if you want to be a student of the game, you can learn them. But I don't think you can teach values.
Well, as a parent, you can, and you do. I do. I've got 4 kids. And I see some of your posts both on LinkedIn. And
I was thinking about it as something that's not learned. But maybe I'm not thinking about that right.
Nah, I think that values are learned. You don't come out of the womb with values.
Yeah, but what I mean by that, okay, so then actually let me then add to this then. Do you think that it's at a young age you're able to learn by the environment you're in?
Yeah.
Do you think that can happen as a 40-year-old jumping into a job environment?
Yeah, I do. I'll tell you why.
Okay.
So you put a couple kids on the planet and you think to yourself, what does it mean to be a Kottoor? Are we religious? Do we value manners? Are we polite? Are we kind? Are we assholes to other people? Are we spoiled, rotten brats? Do we get everything? Is it okay to feel pain? Do our parents help us through the pain, or do they solve it? These are all values that you're taught, that when you get into an interview with Dan Hurwitz, when you're however old to be a sales rep and, maybe you're graduated college, I'm going to ask you a question about, hey, I'm going to put a blindfold on you and stick you on a jet and you're going to land in LA. And it's the story that I talked about before, that ripping interview question that people freak out about, but I love it. I want to know how they answer that question, and their values are going to come right to the surface when I do ask that question. And there are other questions that you can ask where their values come right to the surface. So would you hire that person that in their whole life had a silver platter handed to them and has never felt pain, when you believe as a founder that it's critical for your hire to know how to handle pain? That's how I see it.
So I think what we're nailing, though, or maybe in my brain, what's going on is this. When you're a parent raising a child, you have the energy and I think the wherewithal to and it's part of our role as, I guess, as a parent, is you're going to try to shape them and help them instill the right values. When you're in a professional environment, I don't think we invest in, we won't invest that same time because you can't. You're trying to run and you're trying to continue to move quickly. So you're not going to invest in establishing new values in the people you hire. And I think maybe that's what I'm saying, is that if they're not naturally aligned to the values of our company, then they probably shouldn't be joining your company, I guess is what I'm saying. I'd rather invest my time to teach the skills, not try to transform their value set. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but there are certain values that you can introduce. So I'll give you an example.
Yeah,
Did you ever go over somebody's house?
I can get behind that.
Yeah. Did you ever go over somebody's house and you look around and you think, ooh, this is probably a place where I should take off my shoes before I walk in. And so you take off your shoes and hopefully you don't have any holes in your socks. I had to do this the other day. I don't have any holes in my socks. And I walked into their house and it's beautiful. However, you might find where you walk into a house and you look around and you think, I don't need to take off my shoes. I probably should leave them on. I don't want to catch a disease, you know? And so that's a value. That household has set a value that our home is a place of cleanliness and respect. Sometimes it's religious. There are values that, certain cultures, or I shouldn't say religious, it's cultural. The culture says we take our shoes off when we come in the house.
Is that conformance or is that adoption?
That's a great question.
Right. So to me, conforming is short-lived. And so it's not going to endure while you're crawling through the mud. But if it's adopted, it's in your soul. It's there naturally. So I don't have to remind you about it. It's just something that's there.
What do you think?
This is an interesting one.
It's a good one because it's about values, and values are hugely important in your personal life and your professional life.
First time I'm actually having, I've kind of been I've been on talking about values now for a decade. This might be the first time you're the first human being to give me some very, very fresh perspective about how I think about it.
Yeah. So one of the things that I do when I come into a company is I ask them, what are the values of the operation? What are the values of the business? What do you guys believe in? And a good company will have them. A lot of times companies don't have them. So I initiate the conversation and I say, let's establish some values. And here's why, from a go-to-market standpoint, that's super important. I ask this question. When you leave a customer meeting and that customer goes back and is asked or offers information about you and your company, what are the adjectives you would love for them to use to describe you? Otherwise known as attributes. So let's figure out what we want them to be. And so I have this whole process that I use to determine, do we want to be known as extremely intelligent, creative, innovative problem solvers? Or do we want to be, goofy, fun, cheeky, whatever it may be? There's no wrong answer. It's whatever answer you want. And your entire company culture needs to be built around those values. And then the litmus test is when you ask customers, give me a few adjectives to describe your experience with XYZ company or with Dan Hurwitz or Alex Kottoor. What do you think their answers are? Hopefully they align with your values. And if they don't, you got some work to do. But I think it's a hugely important
But again, go back to the
exercise.
Conformance and adoption thing, which is, are you doing it to satisfy what Dan as my hiring manager or the CEO is requesting of me? Or do I actually believe that?
Well,
right? And so when you say, hey,
question.
do you want to leave a brand of being known as the team that's cheeky and fun and lighthearted? What if they are not that? So they can appear like that in the moment, but are they actually like that?
It depends whether or not those are values or it's a facade.
Yeah. Agreed. And I think this is why, like, in the context of hiring, for example, I just think that they need to innately demonstrate a shared value system. I believe that. Like, I think I can agree with you that, like, you've opened my eyes that some of these things can be learned. I just think in the context of professional life and business, startups, I want to see that value. I want you to demonstrate to me that our values are aligned. I think it's a critical construct for me personally, I guess, as I think about it in the context of business.
Yep. So we just spent a bunch of time talking about why do startups make mistakes? What are the mistakes that they make? And we ended up talking about values and how important it is to understand the values of a person you might want to hire, which hopefully is at the right time from a sales or go-to-market standpoint. And the founder, it's important that that founder releases the reins, but doesn't completely release them at the right time. But really, using your metaphor, is in the trenches with a shovel, surrounded by the marketplace that they serve, and really understands it, and then is able to use the word codify or memorialize what's working, what's not working. That's the data that I shared at scale, and then hands that to the new hire and says, okay, here's everything that I learned. It's all written down right here. Let's go at it together, but at least here's a framework or a starting block for you to begin at, and we're going to continue doing this together. And then at some point, they'll build an entire go-to-market operation off of that first hire. And we ended with values, which I love that we've been talking about this because it's really deep, meaningful stuff. And if you don't have values as to who you are, what you're made of, what you're actually made of, you're probably doing yourself a disservice.
That's how you build companies, right, Dan?
Yeah.
Right? You like, are you the founder that's just building a product? Or are you a founder that's building a company? And if you're going to try to scale a company, I'm a big believer that values, mission, vision, the things that are like that require a lot of thinking. That's the lost art in startup, right? So that's why the founders we work with, I'm like asking them, what's that now? Right? I mean, next time you're around some of your founders, right? Especially where there's co-founders, it's really, really fun question to ask them. Hey, like, tell me what your vision is for this company.
Every time I do
it. And it's just so amazing how like these are 3, 4, sometimes 5 human beings that have dedicated their lives together on something that I would argue is the hardest shit you can possibly do as a human being. It's very difficult stuff building a startup. They're all disjointed. They're all on a different sheet of music. It's crazy to me.
Just did this exercise talking to a company, and there were co-founders, and we're having a great conversation. And I asked each of them, what's the company's vision and mission? And they both answered it consistently. I was excited about. Yeah. And then I asked the follow-up question, what's this company's single biggest asset?
Well, that's a good one.
There are 3 acceptable answers to that question in no special order, in my opinion. 1, if you've got some insane IP and your value is based on how important you are to somebody who might want to buy that IP. And it could be patentable in the software space. Obviously, it's hard to patent because it's expensive and it's hard. That's a whole other conversation. Second answer, your people, which are arguably your single biggest line item on your OpEx.
100%.
Payroll and benefits. Third, and I love this answer, it's Jeff Bezos' answer, your customers.
I was just going to say, I was hoping you were going to go customers.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Now, then you could argue, okay, you can't build a business without customers, but then you could say, but you can't get customers without people.
That's true.
Chicken and the egg.
Yep. Chicken and egg. And that's the criticism I get. If there's any criticism I get around my shovel and trenching out, that sentiment I hold, and I'm passionate about this, is that, Alex, like, we can't just as founders spend 80% of our time in the trench. We got to be with our people. And I get that point, but I think if you're a good leader and you do have people, you're actually, again, from a value perspective, hiring people that actually want to be in the trench too. And that's my point. In the early stage, because I'm not talking about when you're at 15, 20, 30 million of ARR. I'm talking about as you're traversing the space that I'm most passionate about, which is the 0 to 1. If you happen to have a team, that team better value customer obsession and being in the trench too.
Yep.
And because you can't afford not to have that at that stage. And I think the companies that make it out alive and the ones that scale are the ones that have that. And that's the thing I've been able to see now across, let's call it 90 some odd companies, whatever the number is. I see that as a consistent thing. Those that have embraced learning through the voice of the customer are the ones that are not in the graveyard.
We call that listening, right?
Yeah.
I tell my kids, hey, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. Listen twice as much as you speak.
I love it.
I want to end the conversation.
That's still a work in progress for me. But
yeah. I want to end the conversation with the thought of how I devote a tremendous amount of my time and effort to founders of all stages, because I know that the journey is very difficult. And I was enamored with your whole world when you and I spoke for the first time, because you share that same passion. Well, you now are starting or have started or about to launch a company that's all about this, and I'm dying to hear about it. So tell me all about what you're doing.
All right. I know we have a few minutes left, so I'm going to try to keep this, Alex, brief, which is not brief. That's the joke.
That's all right.
Last 2.5 years has been going into helping early stage and growth stage founders with go-to-market. And that's been manifested in a great privilege of sometimes serving as an interim CEO, a fractional CRO, an advisor to the founders or the CEO, all kind of with a focus of stabilizing or accelerating revenue. As I got to reflect on this, my sort of traditional advisory business, I've been struggling with how I'm going to scale the impact. And that's how I think about it. I've been so privileged to be around all these startups, creating, I think, some really cool pockets of impact. But as the software guy, I think to myself that staying in the advisory capacity in the traditional framework, for me, it doesn't fulfill what I want in my life. And so this new thing that we've launched called the Dena Startup Lab is really a manifestation and the next chapter of my thesis of creating impact at scale. And what we're doing, me and my co-founder Srini are doing, is we're trying to provide the immediate access and a real focus on go-to-market for these founders traversing 0 to 1.
Mm-hmm.
And we're trying to make this as accessible as possible. So it's a really, really low cost to enter. And we're doing that by design, by the way. Yes, there's a great business that we can be building here, and we will. But we're trying to make sure that any founder anywhere in the world can gain access to this. What we're trying to do is like help the underdog. I guess that's where the hat comes from. We're trying to help everybody gain access to the things they need to de-risk their journey of startup. And everybody deserves that. And so that's what we're doing right now. I guess there's two kind of things that we're trying to do. One is, again, access, and that's access to our networks of coaches, SMEs, good human beings who are also investors, bringing all of that ecosystem around these early stage founders. And then two is what we call speed to help. If I'm honest about the feedback we've gotten from our first 30 or so founders in our community, is that we are bringing a true desire and speed to the advice and the information these founders need. So gone are the days of having to wait days, weeks, a month to work on a challenge. We have a format in our platform that allows us to work on issues and swarm those issues in sort of minutes. And so everything we do is about pinning back to building acceleration and velocity. And we at the fundamental level believe that if we can tighten up the advice loop and get the support quicker to the founders that need that support, they're able to move quicker. And that's what it's all about.
So you've got a private community for founders to be able to network and talk with one another, but also get SMEs, subject matter experts, to help them solve a myriad of problems and make the journey a little bit more easy.
I love how you distilled that. Yes. and while protecting their finite runway and while protecting the scarce resource of equity. I mean, I think this is another tragedy, is like sometimes you get these really, really early stage companies. We're not talking about the ones you're largely helping. We're talking about these early folks that don't know anybody better, and people are just squeezing the equity out of their business too early. And so what happens, because I've been there too, is that when you do that, you don't know what you don't know. And so you think like, hey, this 3 or 5% of the business I might be giving up to somebody at that stage is okay. But you just don't know that there's a long journey ahead. And if you're going to grow through bootstrap or organically, fantastic. I love those founders, right? But the majority of tech businesses do rely on angel investment, venture capital. And so there's that sort of inorganic kind of outside investor fueled growth that might happen as well. And so you have to plan for those things. And so anyway, I just, one of my mentors used to tell me, protect your equity like it's your unborn child. And it's something I repeat often, early and often, to all my founders. And so like, that's part of what we're doing now. It's like, and it shouldn't be this expensive. It's just like, let's just give them the key. Give them the key, let them open the door, run through it on their own, and with the help and guidance of all of us. And like, that's what we're trying to do at scale.
Yep. Well, I'll tell you what, I'll make an offer to you. I mentor college students, I mentor founders, I do a lot of advisory pro bono because I love the feeling. Yeah, exactly. I love the feeling of helping somebody and make their journey a little bit easier. It makes me feel good as a person. And quite frankly, I wish I had more people to help me during my journey, because I made a lot of mistakes like anybody else, and I learned from them. Took pain.
You and I both.
Took pain. I offer you anything I can do to be an SME for your community so that I can help these folks. And the feeling of helping someone else is the value that I'll get out of it. So
I'll tell you this, Dan, in the blessed interactions we've had, albeit a few of them, right? You're a new friend in my life, is I know you embody that. I mean, you just exude it. You are Dena. Like, and Dena in my wife's mother tongue of Hindi means to give. That's the whole brand of the business. It's about giving. And I always disclaim, I'm not Mother Teresa here. I'm a capitalist. We're building a business. Yes. But there's a huge opportunity to make sure that the door I was able to run through stays open. And we have a huge mission. We're trying to impact 1 million founders, 1 million startups over this next bunch of years of our journey. People look at us like we're crazy, but you know what? We're going to do it. And I'm less concerned about the number, more about changing the lives of these founders, because that's what's going to happen here. The founders that get to win, their lives change in some of these regions of the world that we're helping these founders. It's going to have a ripple effect in the communities that rely on them. So there's just this like amazing feeling that's coming out of this early work we're doing. And it would be an honor to have somebody like you around the table. And we're just getting started. It's literally day 0.1.
Love it. And you mentioned the name of the company is Dena, or the name of the community is Dena.
Dena Startup Lab.
Dena Startup Lab. How do people get in touch with you and Dena Startup Lab?
So you would go to denastartuplab.com, DENA startuplab.com, and it's pretty intuitive sign up process. Minimum requirements are you got to be a good human being, a good founder that actually wants to win, has a burning desire to win. 2, you need to be in progress or in market with an MVP. And 3rd, you just got to be willing to share. You got to be a student and a coach. That's what good communities are reliant on. And that's kind of what we're feeling right now in this safe space that we're building. It's like people can be vulnerable. Where you can be vulnerable, you can grow. And where you can be vulnerable, you're able to share and exchange information far more rapidly. And then we layer on all these great experts in the community that are there to genuinely provide that speed to help. We're all here because we actually give a shit. So anyway, that's what it's about.
That's great. Alex, I've enjoyed this conversation tremendously. I think you're an awesome dude. I love that we have a fairly new friendship, and I like that we're aligned on our values.
Yeah,
because
man.
a big part of this conversation
that,
was about values, and I'm looking forward to many more conversations with you in the future.
This is one of the best conversations I've had recorded. So
hell
thank
yeah,
you. Of course it is. I love it.
Same here, man. All right, well, have a great day.
Take good care, man. Have a great weekend.
Yep.